Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished professional and a coach from Johannesburg, South Africa, Michelle Bisset. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you. Michelle is the founder and managing director of vFactor. She helps leaders and teams rethink and reshape how they navigate through change, uncertainty, and a future in flux. So, Michelle, before we talk about coaching and team dynamics, tell me a little bit about your own journey and what led you to focus on change navigation and transformative coaching.
Thank you. First of all, just thank you for having me. And I'd love to share a little bit about the journey. And as you can imagine, like most people, it's been a bit of a winding path. So filled with change. I spent my childhood growing up in South Africa in the 80s and the 90s. So you can imagine that was my first real taste of what it felt like to experience large-scale systemic change. And I had wonderful opportunities to be part of the first generation that got to really integrate cross-culturally. And so you can imagine lots of change to ingest. Professionally, I then spent 20 years in the technology sector and was incredibly fortunate to lead very early in my career diverse groups that were remote. At one point, I was leading an organization that was spread across Russia, Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Wow.
So if you're looking for a melting pot, that was it. And that was really my first experience of bringing together people from diverse backgrounds remotely, and finding not what made us different, but what made us the same. And I developed from that a real interest in what it was that brought teams together and made them work, and what didn't work. You can imagine in tech, it was fast-paced, it was very challenging, and it was intense. And that was great for a long period of time. I found it exhilarating, and that was where I wanted to be. As I reflect back, there are definitely two defining moments in that career. And the first one was where I had my first opportunity to bring a huge organizational change to the fore and really lead it. And what I could have done was led from the front and told everyone what was happening and expected things to change. But I took a really different approach, and we defined that change as a leadership team together. We spoke about what we were worried about. We were really authentic about what could go wrong. And we actually even designed the organization together. And that was my first real experience of what it could be like to navigate change as a team. And to be vulnerable as a team. And I learned a huge amount about how to create shift by engaging everyone and to bring people on the journey. So that was an incredibly formative experience for me as a leader. And there was another, almost the yin to the yang of that story. I think we all have good and bad, and that's how we know. And this one was, unsurprisingly, during COVID, I joined a new team in April of 2020. So, 2 weeks into world lockdown and went into complete chaos. And the team that I was involved in then, for no one individual person's fault, really was grappling with enormous organizational change, pivots that needed to be made at pace. And we just somehow couldn't get it together. There was enormous pressure in the system. We all felt it. And so, through those two very different experiences, I I really then that kind of led me, I guess, to wanting to make a substantial difference and to alleviate the division, the stress and the pressure and the burnout that I was seeing.
Right.
And so I found my way to using the coaching skills that I'd built up professionally and to really focusing on working with teams to help them to navigate change in a more successful and helpful way.
Absolutely. And as they say, the rest is history. Clearly you're giving a lot of value to a lot of teams. So let's now move on. Can you help me understand V-Factor's team development model? And how do you help teams navigate a future in flux?
So I think to understand our model, you probably need to understand a little bit about V-Factor. So I'd like to kind of roll back if we could. And step back to, so having had this transformative experience and wanting to create a more conducive environment for teams, the real driving force behind V-Factor was to help teams to face uncertainty and disruption and do it cohesively. And we talk about tapping into the power of we. So that's why it's V-Factor.
Okay.
And what we learned was in our conversations with so many customers and so many clients was that a lot of the ways of thinking and the approaches that were being used to navigate change were no longer relevant for an environment that was completely in flux and almost constantly at a pace that we had never known before. And there were these old playbooks, command and control, this notion that a team is always stable or that there needs to be a leader who is all-knowing and there's a hero at the front. And so what V-Factor is really about is about rewriting those playbooks and giving people more relevant ways of engaging together and navigating through change. So when we talk about rewriting them, the model, you asked about the model. We want to make things as simple as possible. We definitely don't want to add to the complexity. And so the model we use is very conveniently the arc of change, ARC. And the A stands for adaptability. So how do we create a mindset which is embracing opportunity, embracing challenge, embracing change, and continuously learning to pivot? So adaptability. Then the R is resilience. So change can be so incredibly challenging and difficult. And what we've learned is that this model of navigating those challenges independently is far less effective than doing it together. So here we talk about how do we build safety? How do we build trust? How do we build communities to support change in organizations? And the final one is collaborative co-creation. So when you've got those bases in place, then you've got a really great grounding to collectively solve problems, to collectively look at the wider system that you're operating in, and to be able to build long-lasting change. So it's an arc of change, and we feel that it's a really holistic approach to helping teams to not just survive, but to really thrive through change in a way that's relevant and helps them to grow their businesses and deliver in a way that sustains them.
Amazing. I love your arc of change. A for adaptability, R for resilience, and C for collaborative co-creation. Thank you. My next question is, how does vulnerability from leadership affect team dynamics, especially during uncertain times? And you seem to have started off at some of the most uncertain times in the world during COVID.
I certainly did. And that was probably a huge act of vulnerability and courage on my part.
Yes.
I don't think there's any secret that vulnerability, particularly from leaders. So we know that leaders have a significant impact on the culture within a team. She's 70% of an individual's experience in a team is based on the leader. So showing vulnerability and being open to sharing uncertainties and not having all of the answers, or speaking about independent challenges, has such a profound impact on allowing for honesty and connection during change. And that's, one of the things that we talk about as a pillar is the need for real dialogue when going through perpetual change, and vulnerability creates the opportunity for dialogue. And when leaders can be authentic, then it creates the safety for others to be authentic. And I mean, I suppose there's a great example from my own experience that I can share about vulnerability and authenticity.
Yeah.
And it happened very early in my career. I was a big proponent of Jack Welch. I thought, everything needed to be perfect and scripted. And, as a leader, I needed to show up in that way. And I was asked to do a presentation to my team and to a wide part of the organization. And, I was very nervous. I over-prepared. And once I delivered it, technically it was probably flawless. But I went to my mentor and I said, how was it? And I really valued her feedback. She said to me, it was great. I missed seeing Michelle. Right? So she missed the vulnerability. She missed the real human touch and connection. And I think that was a defining moment for me around how, by not having the answers and by sharing where we need support and help, we actually bring people on the journey with us as leaders.
What a great response, and what a fabulous story. Thank you. But therefore, that leads me to another question for you. We spoke of vulnerability. My next question is, what role does resilience play in successfully navigating change, and how can leaders build this in their teams?
Well, if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that resilience is not only critical, but I think it's also not something that we can navigate as an individual trait.
Right.
So many people experienced uncertainty, isolation, just the inability to navigate that degree of change independently. And so for me and for WeFactor, resilience isn't something that we do on our own. It's something that we shape by interacting and by supporting with others. And we talk a lot about team well-being and how resilience is built through creating safety and environments where people can feel safe, connected, supported, where they can collectively foster the habits that support them to be resilient and to be able to navigate change and be able to keep morale up when things get difficult. So for me, resilience is about finding those moments to create collaboration, finding those moments to celebrate successes, creating connection, especially in such a remote world, and not expecting it to be just about individual grit and more about trust, collaboration, and the habits that we can cultivate as leaders.
Very well said. Well said. My next question for you, Michelle, is that what does it mean to lead a team through flux? And how can leaders embrace this rather than resist it?
Flux is something that we face every day.
Absolutely.
Our reality is no longer one of events of change. We live in a dynamic world. We're constantly faced with shifting priorities, evolving challenges. And so flux is a daily occurrence. And I think when I think about how teams and leaders in particular can embrace this, The first is really to think about the mindset shift that we need to have when we think about change, and that it's not an isolated event, and it's definitely not something that we can manage. You know, people talk about change management, and there's a place for that, certainly. But we factor is not about managing these events of change.
Right.
It's about building an understanding of how this period of flux can actually be filled with opportunity, that it's a journey, and as leaders, that ability to embrace complexity, to see it as an opportunity, to see it as a learning experience, and actually something that can help them and their organizations remain more relevant is the starting point. It's that, you know, when we talk about rethink, it's about how do we reshape our relationship with flux change.
Very interesting.
And a lot of the work we do is actually, for leaders, is about understanding our own natural response to change, because we all respond differently. And we use the leadership circle model, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's got 3 reactive responses to change. Some people will naturally move into a state of peacekeeping, right? Others will move to protect, and others will try to control. And so if we're trying to control, we're putting processes and rigid, you know, trying to create rigidity, which is not helpful. If we're protecting, we may move away from things that feel risky. And if we're trying to keep the peace, then we may not have the conversations we need to be having that really allow us to move forward. So for leaders, I think understanding their own response and building the awareness for themselves and then awareness for the team can be so impactful in creating a culture which is more responsive and more resilient to the type of change that we face on an everyday basis, so that they can learn, they can adjust both in themselves and to the wider system. But yeah, I think it starts with self, and then it's, you know, it kind of creates a ripple effect when we talk about leading through change.
Very well said. What role does emotional intelligence play in navigating change?
I love this one because it's a big passion for me. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's critical to be able to have the emotional agility to understand what's happening within us and understand what's happening around us. I like to take it a little bit further.
Sure.
So we don't talk just about EQ, we talk about WeQ. And this notion that, you know, when we are navigating change together in teams, it's about tapping into the collective intelligence and building a systemic awareness of what's going on within this team. What do we need to be doing within this team? It's not just me, it's we. And so we really start talking about how can we foster collective learning, collective intelligence, awareness? How do we problem solve together? And a key piece of WeQ is also building shared empathy, especially teams that are, you know, generationally hugely diverse, geographically hugely diverse. The need for real dialogue about how we see the world, what we believe to be true, and creating that empathy is a huge part, not only of EQ, but very much of WeQ and how we can navigate change to be more resilient and help each other to not burn out, help each other to see the benefits of change and to support each other to deliver results despite flux.
Well said. So, Michelle, I have time for 2 more questions. My next question is...
I feel like I may have been talking too much, so
no, you
apologies.
No, you have not been talking. I think your answers are absolutely great, and I'm enjoying every minute of your thoughts that you are sharing with us. My next question is, how can leaders future-proof their teams and organizations for the unpredictable nature of modern work?
Future-proofing is such a strange concept because it assumes that we know what the future is.
Correct.
So we don't know what the future holds. And yet I think there are a number of things that not only leaders, but as individuals we can do to be more change ready. And one of the things, yes, it's about, facing into this constantly unpredictable environment, but understanding also what skills the future might require of us. And more, those skills, I mean, if we look at some of the research from Gallup, the skills that are going to be required are not technical. They're much more human-centered. They're much more about, I think the top three are decision making and complex strategic thinking, building relationships, and leveraging technology. And so if you're wanting to get ready, and we talk about, sometimes people talk about FOMO, so fear of missing out. And lately I've heard about FOBO, so fear of being obsolete.
Yes.
And so if we don't want to be obsolete,
absolutely,
definitely skills that we can start to foster in our organizations. AI is, huge.
Absolutely.
Thinking about how can AI not compete, but how can AI complement? How can it make us more effective? How can it even inform the dynamics in our teams and help us to be more successful as teams?
Correct.
So I think that developing those deeply human skills, the dialogue, and also, maybe being empathetic to the fact that too much change is counterproductive to the results that we want to deliver. And so really recognizing, like, what are the critical changes and giving them sufficient time to embed. Often we want to rush, and that creates more pressure than necessary.
Well said. Well said. And my last question for you, Michelle, as someone who's deeply embedded in change and making a difference through vFactor with so many of your clients, what are some of the latest trends in change navigation that you are seeing that can help leaders to stay ahead?
You mentioned, I think you mentioned, or somehow I thought about the importance of recognizing that navigating change isn't really isolated to what we do as individuals or how we work as teams, although I think the teams are the heart of it. For me, and one of the founding reasons why I felt it was so important to start this journey and calling was that if we can equip ourselves, our leaders, our teams to collaborate in this way, then that can only have a much wider impact. We take those skills home to our families, to our communities, and I believe that by building this kind of shared resilience and problem solving, we can really solve so many more of the problems that the planet faces. So maybe that didn't answer the question, but if I come back to, so how can leaders stay ahead? Some big trends we're seeing, I've already mentioned technology and AI and that kind of thing. Sustainability is another big one. And yes, it's about being good in the wider context of our planet, but it also starts at a much more granular level. If we don't know how to sustain ourselves, how can we sustain our planet?
Absolutely.
How can we, and so I think we're having far more robust conversations about how can organizations really start with sustainable conversations and sustainable work practices, in their teams. And one other, which is kind of interesting, I guess maybe from a technology background, it's quite pertinent, is this notion that stable teams are becoming less and less of the norm, and the teams are far more fluid and in fact flux, and they're created based on skills, and we're bringing in new skills that need to adapt on projects. And so this concept of fluid teaming and needing to build more agile ways of engaging with each other and being more nimble in how we execute to deliver. is something that we're seeing a lot of, and in WeFactor we're wanting to solve.
Absolutely. And on that note, Michelle, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. I think you had such an incredible journey, and you seem to have gone through lots of transformation yourself before you really started WeFactor, starting it off in the middle of such a big challenge, demonstrated, as you said so rightly, tremendous resilience. And of course, I'm sure there was a lot of vulnerability as well in that. We covered a lot of very interesting ground on coaching, on change navigation, and on rethinking and reshaping leadership. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.